Hey guys, in today's video, I put together a list of what I feel like are 10 of the most important things needed in regards to having success to go on and win elections. And I want to take a look at this list here that I put together through the lens of progressive style candidates, whether they be from the Justice Democrats or Our Revolution, for instance. And as I go through this list, I'm going to give my take on where I think these progressive style candidates can have success, maybe some areas where they're going to be fighting an uphill battle. And then at the end of this list, I want to take a look at 5 examples of elections and primaries that we've already had, and some of these are where these progressive style candidates didn't do so well. Some of them they did do well and they were able to go on to win. I'm going to do a little bit of analysis on why I feel that happened. So starting off here, first and foremost, actually before I even get into this list, it's kind of a no-brainer, but you have to have an insane amount of work ethic if you're going to go ahead and win and take down a more established incumbent, for instance, or just somebody who's getting the support of the Democratic machine behind them. If you don't have an insane amount of work ethic, the will, drive, and desire to go on to win, then you shouldn't even sign up and get things going. But that's just the first thing you need. Outside of that, starting off the list here, name recognition, being an incumbent, those are so important to winning elections. If you have a name that people have heard of and know, they feel like they can trust it. And this is where progressives are generally going to have a tough time, especially if they're trying to unseat an incumbent, for instance. Now, if you have a progressive candidate like Ro Khanna, for instance, he already has that name recognition built in, but the vast majority of these Justice Democrats and Our Revolution candidates are going to be ones that are trying to unseat candidates that either are incumbents or have the establishment behind them pushing and trying to get those candidates' names out there if they aren't an incumbent. But if you're a progressive and you're well-known in your area, or maybe somebody like a Cynthia Nixon in New York, she has name recognition, that can at least help her get her foot in the door and people know about her, and maybe that'll help her in particular get more of a vote just because people know who she is over there in that governor's race in New York. But still, this is going to be an area where generally these progressive candidates have a tough time at the start. If they're able to pick up the upset win and go on to win like Ocasio-Cortez, now she's a household name. So many people are well aware of Ocasio-Cortez. Nobody knew her for the most part before her upset victory. So name recognition is something you have to earn over time. And since these progressive groups are just getting started, this is an area where they're going to have to build over time. Now, the next thing on this list is money. And it's unfortunate, but you have to have money to win elections and have success. For the most part, whoever spends the most money is generally going to go on to win a lot of these races. Now, this is another area where it can be tough for progressives because they don't take corporate money and they're going against a lot of times the establishment who has that corporate money behind them, and just a lot of groups that go ahead and support what end up being the establishment type candidates. But that doesn't mean it's a completely lost cause. Small dollar donations, very important to the progressives' cause, and they can do very well with these small dollar donations. We saw Bernie Sanders do extremely well and raise a lot of money in comparison to Clinton, who went more of the corporate money route, but he was able to mount a pretty impressive campaign against Clinton, who had obviously the name recognition in comparison to Sanders back in 2016. So in general, this is going to be an area where progressive candidates have a tougher time, but getting that grassroots small dollar donations can at least make things somewhat competitive. If you are going against somebody who's very wealthy, for instance, and can just self-fund their own campaign, that makes things a little bit harder yet, but we'll continue to move on through this list. The next thing is endorsements. And this can be a wide array of endorsements. If you're a progressive candidate and you can get the backing of somebody like a Bernie Sanders, obviously that's very important. Or even groups like Our Revolution and the Justice Democrats, that's very important, or progressive groups in general. But then outside of that, to have success, getting support from local groups or unions like teacher unions, the nurses union, all of these different groups that can go ahead and support your candidacy, not just financially, but also by getting their members to go out and vote for you and help with your candidacy. Very important to go out and get endorsements. And one race that I'm going to be analyzing at the end of this video, endorsements were, I think, really important to him going on and having success in winning his election. But the next step here, press coverage. Getting national media, very important, and can be tough, obviously, for progressive candidates, but this is an area where they're making inroads. First step was Bernie Sanders getting in the national conscience there and getting on it seems consistently like he makes appearances on CNN, MSNBC, maybe not so much Fox News, but getting out there, getting your name recognized in the national media, but maybe even more important than that, local media, whether that's your local news channels, newspapers, radio, and doing so without having to pay for advertisements. We've seen this. If you're a candidate and you can try to get your name into the local news stories and make the cycles, that can have a big positive effect on your campaign and be very helpful. Ocasio-Cortez, she was able to get a lot of local support, at least in terms of getting her name out there more, especially when Joe Crowley finally ended up deciding that he wanted to debate Ocasio-Cortez on the local news channel there in the Bronx, New York. But getting that press coverage is going to be very important, especially if you can do it without having to pay for advertisements. It's so key that you can do that. And when you have a limited budget, getting that free press, for instance, in 2016, like Donald Trump was able to do, he got estimated in the billions of free dollars in press, especially from the mainstream media, the national media. That's just another important thing. And with these progressive candidates, Ocasio-Cortez with the big upset and now kind of giving a more national conscience to this movement that's going on with progressive candidates, that's only going to have a snowball effect and continue to help as potentially we get more progressive upsets down the line here in the coming months. So then the next thing on this list, having social media presence and activity, and progressives tend to do a very good job with this. And another thing I know is that these progressive candidates on Twitter, for instance, they help each other out. They retweet each other's, whether it's articles or what they say on Twitter, and that can help get you more followers, have more of a presence. And that, again, is another one of those things that has a snowball type effect in an area where progressives can do very well. And as we continue to go through this list, these are going to be some more things that I think progressive candidates can do very well in, and maybe even have a step up over established type candidates. So moving on here, a platform that excites voters. I think this is a big reason why Hillary Clinton lost the 2016 election. She didn't excite the progressive base or young voters, for instance, to go out and help her campaign or go out and vote at the end of the day. If you want to win elections, you have to give people a reason to go out and vote for you. Bernie Sanders was very effective in doing this. He didn't have any name recognition, but still did quite well against the political establishment and Hillary Clinton, for instance. And he was able to do that by having a platform that really galvanized a lot of excitement. And having that platform that excites people is certainly something progressive candidates can do very well in an area where I think they have a step up over more established type Democrats. And then moving on here, pooling your resources. We saw this with Ocasio-Cortez going on to win. A lot of different progressive candidates came into her district, pooled their volunteers and their assets, and able to go on and help her get her over the line. And now we see this have a carryover effect where Ocasio-Cortez has been going in and helping in other areas. I believe her team is going in and helping in Delaware right now with that Senate candidate. She's also going around the country and helping candidates. We saw that with her appearance in Kansas with Brent Welder and James Thompson, and also she's going up and doing the same thing for Abdul El Sayed in Michigan. But being able to go out and pool your resources, and also these candidates are a resource in themselves just beyond their volunteers and what they're able to do in that instance and scenario. So that's another thing that I feel like progressives can do quite well, especially as they get more of these candidates that are becoming more well-known throughout the nation, like Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez, for instance. And then the next thing on this list, yard signs, billboards, bumper stickers, especially with these local elections, getting out and having a lot of yard signs. People that live around their neighbors, if they have a friendly relationship with their neighbors and they see in general who their neighbors are voting for, that can have a big impact on who they end up voting in the booths for. They say, oh, I've seen that name before. I trust my neighbor's judgment and opinion on that. So that's very important. And then obviously having billboards, that can be kind of expensive, but then also bumper stickers on cars or just other things that get your name out there so people become more aware of your name and they recognize it when they're in that voting booth and casting a ballot. The next thing on this list is grassroots support and volunteers. This is an area where progressives can have a ton of success because they tend to have more enthusiasm, energy, and especially a lot of young people behind their candidacies with, again, a lot of energy and go out can knock on doors, can phone bank, can text people, and just in general, getting more people out there to get aware of your candidacy. Again, this is an area where I think progressives can exceed, especially when they're pooling their resources of volunteers and helping out other races. This can have a very successful and snowball type effect. And then the last thing on this list here, that's going to be choosing the right race. This is kind of tough, but we're going to get into this more as I move over to analyzing some of these races here. But choosing the right race where you can have success is so important. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to move things over. Okay, so starting off here, the first race I want to talk about is the California U.S. Senate primary. And the progressive candidate here is going to be Allison Hartson. You can see she got 2% of the vote, about 93,000 votes cast. Not obviously close enough to go on and get to the ability to where she was able to go against Dianne Feinstein. De Leon, a little bit more progressive than Feinstein, but certainly not as progressive as Hartson. So why did Hartson not have success? She had a lot of volunteers supporting her, and that was able to get her name out there a little bit more. But the areas that were tough is it just is a very tough race to win a statewide election in California. It's imperative you have that name recognition. You need a lot of money because you have to get not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands, if not even over 1 million votes in these primaries to have success. And when you're limited on resources, specifically with money, it's so hard in a very populous state like California. So that's one of those races that if you are a progressive, you need much more name recognition. Maybe somebody like a Ro Khanna, if he would have ran for Senate, the fact that he has that built-in name recognition, a popular politician from the state of California, he might have been able to go ahead and get into the top 2. But being somebody who doesn't have the name recognition and doesn't have the resources, winning in a state that's so big, it's just a tough race. And that's why I think Allison Hartson came up well short in that regard. Moving on to a smaller state, certainly much smaller than California in terms of population. That's the Senate matchup in the state of West Virginia. And Paula Jean Swearengin, she did respectable, almost 50,000 votes, but coming up well short against the incumbent Joe Manchin. So Manchin, extremely well-known, name recognition throughout the state of West Virginia. That makes things tough. Again, another one of those statewide elections where if you don't have the name recognition and you don't have the funding behind your candidacy, it's just so hard to pick up enough momentum to go on and claim the victory. But actually, Paula Jean Swearengin did a tremendous job considering she had such little resources, not just in comparison to Joe Manchin, but also when we go over to the Republican side, you can see she got more votes than any of the Republican candidates as well. And these Republican candidates outspent Paula Jean Swearengin by a large margin. And the reason she was able to at least have some success is because she had a lot of grassroots support behind her. And it just shows you that if you have some of the checklist, you can have some success, but the more that you can check off and the more important things that you can check off in Joe Manchin's instance, name recognition, money, endorsements, press coverage, it's just too much to overcome. And that's another one of those races that Paula Jean Swearengin had an uphill battle the whole time, and she came up short, although a respectable result certainly in the number of votes she got. But again, not the kind of race that I would probably put resources in, at least initially, for progressive candidates to go on and win elections. So those were 2 defeats. Now I want to take a look at some victories that progressives had. Starting out in Nebraska, District number 2, Kara Eastman taking down Brad Ashford. Very close competitive election. Ashford had the push of the establishment behind him. Eastman had the grassroots effort. And why was she able to win this? And particularly these congressional races where you need 10, 20, 30,000 votes perhaps, much more doable than a statewide election. Even a statewide election in West Virginia, for instance, Paula Jean Swearengin was probably going to have to get about 100,000 votes potentially to go on and win that primary, especially against an incumbent. But Eastman, another thing on her side is she didn't have to go against an incumbent in this scenario. That's another reason why she was able to have enough success to go on and win. But going against the Republican incumbent on the other side, going to be tough for her to win the general election, but was able to win the primary against an establishment candidate. And the reason behind that, again, is because when you have to get a lower number of votes, it becomes much more feasible when you don't have all the money behind your candidacy that these establishment type candidates are typically going to have. And having the endorsements and help from groups like the Justice Democrats and Our Revolution can certainly help in these types of races, especially in district races. And now another race that I think it was extremely smart on the Justice Democrats' part. They had a lot of candidates, and they knew they couldn't fully support all of them for having them all to go on and win their election. So what they decided to do is to put a ton of resources into this Ocasio-Cortez race, because I'm assuming they thought if they were able to win this congressional seat away from Joe Crowley, who's one of the leadership roles in the Democratic House, that it would get a lot of notoriety, a lot of press coverage, and we've seen that's exactly what has happened. And then that's had a snowball effect to now where Ocasio-Cortez, this movement behind her, has been able to spread over to these other candidates, and it's having a bigger impact. Extremely smart on the Justice Democrat side. They played favorites here with Ocasio-Cortez, and that obviously along the way, it probably hurt a number of candidates in their opportunity to go on and win their respective races. But the fact that they were able to pool their limited resources and win such an important election, and now to have a progressive champion in their side like Ocasio-Cortez who can bring media coverage to all these other candidates, it's just going to have a big snowball effect from here going forward. So that was a great race to pick. And also the fact that they knew that they were only going to need maybe about 10 to 15,000 votes to go on and win this particular primary, because it's a primary that doesn't have, in general, the greatest turnout. So that's another area that's really smart to pick the right race in that instance. And then also, if you're able to go on to pick a race that is very safe Democrat, and you're able to go on and win your primary, then you pretty much know you're going to go ahead and win the general election. So another very smart choice there on Ocasio-Cortez and the Justice Democrats side. And now one more race I want to analyze. So you can see the last two races I talked about were congressional districts where you didn't need as many votes to go on to win. But now I want to take a look at a larger win here, and that was the Maryland governor primary. Ben Jealous able to win, getting over 220,000 votes, winning with almost about 40% of the vote in what was a very packed primary, certainly in the number of candidates that decided to run. But the person he went against, Rushern Baker, had the full support of the Democratic establishment. Ben Jealous had the full support of the progressives. And why was he able to win a statewide election, getting hundreds of thousands of votes, where somebody like a Paula Jean Swearengin or an Allison Hartson came up short? And a lot of that is because Ben Jealous, he went out and he helped Bernie Sanders back in 2016. He has name recognition because of that. Also, he was head of the NAACP, which obviously helps him in terms of getting the African-American vote, which is very important in a state like Maryland. And then another thing that was very important to him winning is he went out and he got a lot of endorsements, a lot of different groups and organizations to get behind his candidacy. And that also had a very important and prominent role in him going on to win that election, where he needed to get a lot of votes. Also, he did a really good job in fundraising, small dollar donations. You can win if you have the name recognition and enough of that progressive movement behind you, where you can get it on the national stage and get not just donations, small dollar from your home state, but from states around the country who want to see progressive candidates succeed. So Ben Jealous was able to go ahead and win by a rather convincing margin, considering that it was going to be a very tough race for him to beat the establishment-backed candidate in that governor's race. So that's pretty much going to wrap up this video, guys. We went through what I feel are 10 of the most important things you need to go on and win elections, areas where progressives can do well, maybe some areas where they have a little bit tougher time in general. But again, these groups like the Justice Democrats and Our Revolution, they're still relatively young, actually very young, usually just a year or two or so old. They have a lot of time in the future here where they can build off of candidates that continue to get the national spotlight. It all started with Bernie Sanders. Now they have somebody in Ocasio-Cortez. Maybe down the line, if some of these other candidates are able to win their primaries, like Abdul El Sayed, Brent Welder, the Iron Stash up there in Wisconsin, and just getting that more name recognition, which brings in more money, more endorsements, more press coverage, more social media and followers, and everything just from there continues to snowball and make it more feasible for these progressives to win future elections. Really, we have the trailblazers right now in the candidates that are just getting started with this movement. But again, it's going to be an uphill battle, but it should get easier as time goes on and you get more progressives that win elections and then go ahead and represent their constituents in Congress or the Senate or even the presidency. So that's going to wrap up this video, guys. Thanks for stopping on in. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment, give your opinion on what you think is most important to go on and win elections and what you think about all of this and where progressives can maybe have success. Thanks for stopping on in. Check out all of our election coverage and prediction videos over at our YouTube channel, and we hope to see you guys back here for future videos. Bye.